The night Vola Earthshaker finally stopped walking, it was not because her legs had given out, it was because someone had left a light on for her. She had been moving through the dark for 3 days straight, bleeding from a gash along her left ribs where a clan elder's blade had caught her as she turned to run, not from cowardice. She had never run from cowardice in her 26 years of breathing this world's hard air. She had run because there was nothing left to fight for in that camp, nothing left to defend, and standing in the ash of a war tent with a dozen men loyal to Warchief Grota circling her would not have been bravery. It would have been stupidity, and Vola Earthshaker had survived too many wars to die for a cause that had already burned to the ground around her. She wore what she always wore on campaign, a fitted leather bodice, dark-oiled and cinched tight at her ribs and waist with a double row of brass grommets and a wide leather lace that crossed from hip to hip, cut close enough to move with her body rather than against it. Below it, dark traveling trousers tucked into knee-high boots of thick tanned hide, worn smooth at the inner thighs from years of riding and hard marching. The bodice was sleeveless, bearing arms that were corded with muscle, deeply green-skinned, the left one marked from elbow to shoulder with the old scar lines of her clan's rite of passage. Around her neck hung a single cord of braided sinew from which a small carved stone rested against her collarbone, a stone her mother had shaped when Vola was small, in the shape of a mountain with its summit broken off. For strength without pride, her mother had said. Her mother was dead. Most things Vola had loved were dead. She had crossed the border out of orc territory 2 nights before, wading the Greythorn River at a shallow crossing she'd memorized years ago, when she was still young enough to think that knowing the paths between worlds meant something other than loneliness. Now she was on the human side of the frontier, which in this season meant frozen mud, pine-black ridgelines, and the occasional distant glow of homestead lanterns that always went dark when they heard her boots on the trail. This one did not go dark. She crested a low rise and saw the cabin below her, a solid thing, timber-built, with a stone chimney throwing a thread of smoke into the cold air. The porch was low and wide, running the full length of the front face, and there on a post at the porch's corner hung an oil lantern, burning steady and amber in the dark. It was not a signal. It was not a trap. It was simply a lamp left on, the way a person leaves a lamp on when they think someone might still be coming home. Vola stood at the edge of the tree line for a long moment, her hand pressed flat against her wounded ribs, feeling the wet warmth there that meant she had been bleeding again since she climbed the last ridge. She looked at the lamp. She looked at the dark windows. She looked at the curl of smoke. She was not sentimental. She was not naive. She had spent 26 years learning the precise cost of trusting the wrong thing, and she was not about to forget those lessons now. But she was also going to die if she kept walking. She came down off the rise slowly, not hiding, because hiding when you were this tired was only hiding from yourself. She walked straight down the slope toward the cabin, one hand at her side, the other pressed to her ribs, and she stopped at the edge of the porch. Lights reached just inside the circle of amber glow, where anyone inside could see her clearly if they looked out. The door opened. He was not what she expected, though she could not have said exactly what she had expected. He was tall for a human, perhaps an inch or two shorter than her own 6 feet, with broad shoulders and a build that spoke of years of physical work rather than any particular gift of nature. His hair was dark and a little long, curling at his collar the way hair does when a man cuts it himself by feel rather than by mirror. His jaw was shadowed with several days of growth, and his eyes catching the lamplight as he stepped onto the porch were a clear, steady brown, the kind that did not flinch. He held a rifle loosely at his side, barrel down, not raised, not aimed, just present the way a working man carries a tool. He looked at her. He looked at the hand pressed to her ribs and at the dark stain spreading through the leather there. He looked at her face, at the small lower tusks that curved up just past her lips, at the deep green of her skin in the lamplight, at the ridge of her brow and the amber gold of her eyes, and then he looked back at her wound. "You are bleeding through that," he said. It was not a question, and it was not a greeting, and it was not the beginning of a threat. It was simply a fact, stated plainly, by a man who had apparently decided that the most pressing detail in front of him was a medical one. "I am aware," Vola said. Her voice was low, accented with the broad vowels of the northern orc clans, roughened by years of giving orders in wind and rain. "I have got clean cloth and spirits inside," he said. "You are welcome to come in." She studied him. "You do not know me." "No," he agreed. "I am an orc," she said, as if that might have escaped his notice. Something flickered at the corner of his mouth, not mockery, not amusement exactly, more like a man hearing a thing he considers obvious but does not want to make her feel foolish for saying. "I can see that," he said. "I also see that you are bleeding and on my porch, and it is cold enough tonight to kill a person who is already hurt. So the invitation stands." A long silence stretched between them. The lamp swayed almost imperceptibly in a breath of wind. "If this is a trap," Vola said, "I will kill you before I go down." "That is fair," the man said. "It is not a trap. My name is Clayton Turner. I run this farm alone, and I have not spoken to another person in 11 days, which means I am not plotting anything clever. I'm mostly just tired and glad of company, whatever it looks like." He turned and went back inside, leaving the door open behind him. Vola Earthshaker stood on the porch for a full 5 seconds more, her ribs aching, her boots soaked through, the lamplight steady at her shoulder. Then she followed him in. The inside of Clayton Turner's cabin was exactly what the outside promised: functional, lived in, and maintained with the quiet stubbornness of a man who knew no one was coming to help him. A stone hearth occupied most of the far wall, burning low and even. A wide plank table held the organized scatter of a working life. A wooden bowl, a tin mug, a length of harness leather half repaired, a small folded paper that might have been a letter or a tax notice, turned face down. Shelves ran along the east wall stacked with provisions, flour sacks, dried beans, stoppered jars of preserved food, a row of candles, a bundle of medicinal herbs Vola recognized as yarrow and dried bloodleaf. There was a loft above, accessible by a short timber ladder, and below it a single wide bed with a thick wool blanket. A wood-burning iron stove in the corner held a pot from which something warm was simmering, something with salt and dried meat, and the smell of it hit Vola so hard she had to stop walking for a moment. She could not remember the last time she had been inside a warm place that smelled like food. Clayton set his rifle against the wall beside the door, fully within her sight, deliberately not hidden, and moved to the shelf where he kept a tin box of medical supplies. He pulled out a roll of clean linen, a dark bottle of spirits, and a small pot of something waxy, an herb that she guessed was a drawing salve. "Sit," he said, nodding at a chair near the hearth. She sat. She did not slump, because even now she was not built for slumping, but she allowed herself to lower carefully into the chair and let the warmth of the fire come at her face, and it cost her something to do it. Some last held tension she had been carrying so long she had stopped noticing its weight. "Can you get the bodice open?" he asked. He was not watching her, was instead measuring spirit onto a cloth, his back half turned. "Yes," she said. She worked the lace loose with her right hand, and when she pulled the left side of the bodice away from the wound she felt the fresh, bright bite of air on torn skin. The cut was a handspan long, starting 2 inches below her armpit and curving toward her back, deep enough to need tending, but not deep enough to have found anything vital, or she would not have been walking at all. It had crusted over and split open again at least twice in the past 2 days. Clayton came to her side, crouched to the level of the wound, and looked at it without touching. He looked at it the way a man looks at a problem he is going to solve, not a spectacle he is going to be repulsed by. "This needs to be cleaned and closed," he said. "I can do it if you will let me, or I can put everything here beside you and you can manage it yourself. Your choice." The offer surprised her. Most people, she had found, either ran from her or tried to make decisions for her, both of which she hated equally. This man was offering her the choice, and she understood in that moment, quietly, without fanfare, that this was a man who had thought about what it meant to have something done to you that you had not been asked about. "Do it," she said. He was careful. That was the word she kept returning to over the following minutes. He was careful with the spirit-soaked cloth, working along the cut with short, firm strokes that cleaned without dragging. He was careful with the salve, which he applied with 2 fingers in a slow, deliberate motion, and when she hissed once from the sting of it he paused, not pulling away, not apologizing, just pausing, waiting for the moment to pass, and then continuing when it had. He was careful with the linen binding, pulling it firm but not tight, enough to hold things together without stopping the blood below. When he was done, he sat back on his heels, looked at his work, and nodded once the way a man does when something has met the minimum standard he set for himself. "You are not going to be able to keep moving on that tonight," he said. "Probably not tomorrow either." "I am aware," she said again. He looked up at her, then really looked at her, in the full firelight, with the lamp burning at the window and the warmth of the stove making the whole cabin feel golden and close. She looked back at him and did not look away. She was striking by any measure, nearly as tall as him, her green-skinned face angled and strong-boned, the small tusks curving up from her lower jaw in a way that should have been alarming and instead was simply her, the way a hawk's beak is simply the hawk. Her amber eyes were extraordinarily clear, the color of late autumn sunlight through birch leaves, and they held in them a watchfulness so ancient and practiced that it was almost like looking at the eyes of something that had survived by being smarter than everything around it. Her hair was dark and thick, braided back from her face in a single heavy plait that had come half loose and was sending strands across her forehead and jaw. She was, in that moment, one of the most formidable and most exhausted-looking people Clayton Turner had ever seen. He stood up and went to the stove without saying anything more, and he ladled 2 bowls of the stew barley and dried venison and root vegetables, nothing elegant, but hot and filling, and set one on the arm of her chair. He sat across from her at the table with his own bowl, and they ate without speaking for a while, which turned out to be one of the more comfortable silences Vola had experienced in a very long time. "What is west of here?" she asked, when the bowl was half empty. "Harrow Ford," he said. "Town, maybe 4 hours on foot if you are not hurt, less on horseback. Is it the kind of town that shoots first?" He thought about it honestly, which she appreciated. "Some of them would," he said. "The sheriff is decent. A few of the traders have dealt with orc folk from the border market. They are not going to trouble you, but there are others who would make it ugly." He paused. "Where are you trying to get to?" "I do not know yet," she said. It was an honest answer, and he accepted it as one. "Then there is no rush tonight," he said. "The loft has extra blankets. You can rest." She looked at him across the table. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "This," she said. "All of it. The lamp was already on when I came over that rise. You did not know I was coming." Clayton turned his mug between his hands. In the firelight she could see the calluses on his palms, the rough-heeled knuckles of a man who worked with his hands every day of his life. He looked at the mug for a moment before he answered. "My wife used to say I left the lamp on too long after her passing," he said. "That was 2 years ago. Fever in the spring. I keep leaving it on. I do not know that I have a good reason. Maybe it is habit. Maybe I still think someone is supposed to come home." He looked up, not with self-pity, just with the plain steadiness of a man who has been carrying something a while and has learned to carry it without staggering. "You needed it tonight. That is reason enough." Vola looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked down at her bowl. "My name is Vola Earthshaker," she said. It was the first time she had said it to anyone in months without it being either a battle cry or a surrender demand. "Clayton Turner," he said, even though they had established this. He said it again anyway, like a handshake, like the beginning of something. She slept in the loft under 2 wool blankets and a heavy fur, and she slept without dreaming for the first time since the last war camp burned. The days that followed did not move the way days usually moved for Vola, which was to say that they did not move like a march or a campaign. They moved slowly. They moved the way a river moves in the broad, flat land before the mountains, spread wide and unhurried. She told herself she was staying because the wound needed to close, and this was true enough to serve as the reason for the first 3 days. But by the fourth day, the wound was crusted over cleanly and pulling together, and she was still there. She found herself waking early, before Clayton, and going out in the cold pre-dawn to the well to draw water for the morning. She had always been an early riser. Battlefields required it, and the habit did not know to stop for peacetime. When Clayton came down from the loft and found the water already drawn and the fire built up, he looked at her with something that was not quite surprise, more like a quiet gratitude that he expressed by starting to make enough breakfast for 2 people without being asked. He had a farm to run. The season was turning toward what passed for late autumn on this part of the frontier, which meant the cold was sharpening, and the list of tasks before the deep freeze was long and urgent. There was firewood to split and stack, a section of the paddock fence that had sagged through the summer and needed resetting, a root cellar to finish banking with earth before the ground froze solid, a half-ton of hay in the upper field that should have been moved to the barn 3 weeks ago, but there had been only one pair of hands to move it. Clayton went at all of it with a methodical steadiness that she recognized as the particular competence of a person who had learned to pace themselves, because no one was coming to help. On the 5th day, Vola picked up the second axe from the splitting stump without asking and started working through the pile of rounds beside the barn. Clayton watched her for a moment. She split wood the way she did everything physical, efficiently and completely, not performing strength, but using it as naturally as breathing. And then he went back to his fence resetting without comment, which she appreciated more than any praise would have been. By the end of the day, they had done in 8 hours what would have taken him 3 days alone. He made supper that night with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has seen what it is like to have enough help, and she sat at his table and ate with the strange peace of a person who has not felt useful in a nonviolent way for a very long time. "You know how to work a farm," he said. "My clan territory included farmland," she said. "Before the war took it, my mother kept a kitchen garden the size of this paddock. She grew Healer's mint and 3 varieties of root vegetable, and she was very particular about the spacing." She said it matter-of-factly, but something moved across her face when she said it, a shadow that was not sadness exactly, more like the shape of sadness that a person has already processed and carries with them the way they carry other fundamental things, like the knowledge of how cold winter gets. "She sounds formidable," Clayton said. "She was the most formidable person I have ever known," Vola said, "and I have killed a warchief." She paused. "2 warchiefs actually over the years, different wars." Clayton nodded, completely seriously, as if this were a perfectly ordinary piece of personal history. "What happened to the clan territory?" he asked. "The farmland." She was quiet for a moment. Not unwilling. She was almost never unwilling to speak a hard truth. It was one of the things she had always refused to be weak about, but organizing it into the right words took a moment, because there were so many ways the story could go, and most of them were too large for a supper table conversation. "My clan, the Earthshaker clan, out of the northern Greywood, was one of the larger ones," she said. "We held territory along the Greythorn Ridge for 4 generations. My grandmother fought in 2 border wars. My mother fought in 1. I have fought in 3. She looked at her hands on the table, big, scarred, green-knuckled. 3 different wars, 3 different causes, 3 different warchiefs telling 3 different stories about why we had to bleed again. And every time when the fighting was done, the territory shrank a little more, or the elders died, or the young ones who survived grew up angry enough to start the whole thing over." She was quiet again. "The last one, the one I was running from when you found me, was not even a border war. It was internal. Grota's faction against the old families, against anyone who said the wars had cost too much." "And you said it," Clayton said, "not a question." "I said it to Grota's face in front of his whole war council," she said. which was not my most strategically sound moment, but I have never been able to keep my mouth shut about things I believe are true. What did you say to him? She looked across the table at him. His face was open, listening, the firelight moving across the strong line of his jaw and the steady brown of his eyes. I said that we had buried 600 of our own in 10 years for land we did not hold for longer than a season before giving it up again, she said. I said that a leader who sends his people to die for the same hill twice is not brave, he is wasteful. And I said that if the clan had half the courage in council that it had in battle, we would have made peace with the Redthorn territory 5 years ago and our grandchildren would have something left to inherit. She paused. He did not take it well. I imagine not, Clayton said. The blade caught me going over the tent wall, she said, touching her side briefly. One of his not grow to himself. He does not dirty his own hands. She looked at the table. I do not know if the old families survived. I do not know if anyone is still fighting. I left because staying would have meant dying, and I did not think dying there was worth anything. It was not, Clayton said, with a calm certainty that startled her. She looked at him. You are worth more than dying for a man who sends others to do his bleeding, Clayton said. That is not an opinion about orcs or humans or wars. That is just a fact about people. He picked up his mug. And now you are here, not dying, and that seems significantly better. Vola stared at him for a moment, and then something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile, because smiling did not come easily to a face built for war, but a softening around the eyes and the corners of her mouth, a brief vulnerability that she did not try to hide and did not try to explain. You are a strange man, Clayton Turner, she said. I have heard that, he agreed and drank his cider. The wound had mostly healed by the end of the second week, but the conversation about leaving had still not happened. It had not happened because neither of them brought it up, and neither of them brought it up because both of them understood, quietly, without saying so, that something had begun between them that neither one quite had the words for yet, and that the moment would resolve itself when it was ready. What happened instead of that conversation was that Vola helped Clayton move the hay from the upper field to the barn, which took 2 full days of hard labor, and left them both pleasantly exhausted and covered in chaff, sitting on the barn floor against a hay bale and passing a canteen of water back and forth. She told him about the northern graywood in summer, how the light came through the canopy and hit the undergrowth in shafts, and how the Earthshaker women had a tradition of racing each other through the trees on the last warm night of summer, barefoot, and the one who made it to the standing stone first got to name a thing. She told him she had won 5 times and that she had named a meadow, a river crossing, a type of storm cloud, a color of sunset, and once a child, not her own but her cousin's daughter who had been born just after the race. What did you name her? Clayton asked. Vola, she said, perfectly straight-faced, and he laughed, a full, real laugh head back, the kind that comes out of a person who has not laughed in too long and is almost surprised to find it still in them. She watched him laugh and felt something warm move through her chest like the first light over a ridge. She helped him reset the paddock fence, which involved a good deal of hard digging in the cold stiffening earth, and somewhere in the middle of it, when they were working side by side and the cold was turning their breath to vapor, she felt his shoulder against hers as they both reached for the same post, and neither of them moved away. It was such a small thing. It should not have meant anything. She had stood in shield walls, pressed flank to flank with warriors twice his weight in full iron plate. She had shared a bedroll with clan sisters in frozen mountain camps because warmth meant survival. Physical proximity was not something she was unfamiliar with, and yet the quiet pressure of his shoulder against hers in the cold morning air sent a slow, deliberate warmth up the side of her arm that had nothing to do with temperature. They both kept working. Neither said a word about it. But that evening she caught him watching her from across the room with an expression she had learned to read on people, a particular combination of awareness and restraint, the face of someone who has noticed something about themselves and has decided to be careful with it. She turned back to the harness she was mending on her side of the table and said nothing, because she was being careful with it too. The breaking point came from outside, as breaking points usually did. Clayton had business in Harrow Ford. He needed to sell a portion of the root crop before the hard freeze made the roads impassable, and there were supplies he could not replace from his own stores. He had been putting it off, working around it, and one morning he came in from the barn and said simply, "I need to go to town today. You could stay here or you could come. Either is fine with me." Vola thought about it. She had been inside the property lines of this farm for 19 days. She had begun to feel the edges of the territory the way she always felt the edges of anything, with a restlessness that was not unhappiness but was her nature. She was not meant to stay still indefinitely. She was built for moving through the world. "I will come," she said. Harrow Ford was 4 hours south by wagon, down a rutted trail that wound through mixed pine and bare-limbed hardwood, past 2 smaller homesteads and a crossroads trading post. The morning was clear and brittle cold, and Vola sat beside Clayton on the wagon bench with a woolen blanket across her lap, her breath coming in slow white clouds, watching the country move past. She felt him glance at her once, twice, assessing not her but the situation ahead, what coming into Harrow Ford with an orc woman on his bench would mean. "Tell me what to expect," she said. He was quiet a moment. "I am not going to lie to you and say it will be comfortable," he said. People in Harrow Ford have mostly heard orcs from a distance, through war reports and the kind of stories that get worse every time they are retold. There are 2 or 3 men in town who fought in the eastern border campaigns and came home with the kind of anger that looks for a place to live. He paused. "But the market square is public. Nothing is going to happen in the market square that I cannot manage." "I do not need you to manage anything for me," she said. "I know that," he said, with no defensiveness, only acknowledgement. "I meant that I will be there." There was a difference, and she recognized it, and it mattered to her more than she expected. The wagon rolled into Harrow Ford around mid-morning, when the market was in full session. Carts and stalls spread out in the rutted square around the well, the smell of wood smoke and livestock, the noise of people bargaining and children running and dogs tracking the smell of meat from the butcher's stall. It was a real town, not large but not small, with a timber-fronted saloon on one side and a general store on the other, and a cluster of houses backing up against the tree line. People saw her. It happened in a ripple, the way notice always spreads through a crowd, one person stopping, turning to say something to the next turning to look, the word moving like a current. An orc. There is an orc on Turner's wagon. Within a minute the market square had a particular quality of charged stillness to it, the kind that precedes either violence or the decision not to be violent. Vola kept her chin level and her hands visible on her lap, and she did not let her face do anything at all. Clayton pulled the wagon to a stop near the well, set the brake, and stepped down first. He came around and offered her his hand. It was an ordinary gesture, the kind of hand a man offers a woman getting down from a wagon, and she looked at it for exactly 1 second before she took it. His hand was warm and rough and entirely steady. She stepped down from the wagon and stood in the market square of Harrow Ford, 6 feet tall and green-skinned and utterly composed, and the crowd watched. A man came out of the cluster near the butcher's stall. He was broad, going to heaviness, with a thick beard and the kind of sunburned neck that spoke of years of outdoor labor. He had the particular posture of a man who has decided to be the person who says the thing everyone else is thinking. "Turner," he said, loudly enough to be a statement rather than a greeting. "What are you bringing into town?" Clayton turned to look at him. He did not step in front of Vola, did not try to shield her because she was not a thing that needed shielding. But he turned fully to face the man, and his voice when he answered was quiet and clear and very, very steady. "Her name is Vola Earthshaker," Clayton said. "She is staying on my property. She is here today to help me sell root crop to anyone who wants to buy it." He looked around the square, taking in the watching faces calmly. "If someone wants to buy root crop, I am parked by the well. If someone wants trouble, I suggest they think hard about how that ends for them." He said the last part with such perfect, unhurried matter-of-factness that it was almost not a threat, almost. But it was, and everyone heard it, and the crowd stood on the edge of its decision for a moment that felt longer than it was. The broad man looked at Vola. Vola looked back at him steady, golden-eyed, saying nothing, giving him nothing. He turned and walked away. The market resumed, not warmly, not without stares, but without incident. Clayton sold 2/3 of the root crop in the first hour, and while he was doing it, Vola stood at the wagon's side, present and visible, and a few of the townspeople who came to look at the goods ended up talking to her briefly, cautiously, with the stilted courtesy of people who have been trained to fear a thing, and are slightly embarrassed to find the thing is not frightening them. One older woman asked about the harness on the wagon, and Vola answered her, and afterward the older woman bought a sack of turnips without any particular fuss. The two of them had lunch at the edge of the square, seated on the wagon bed with bread and hard cheese from the general store, watching the market move around them. The sun was properly up now, and the day had warmed just enough to make it bearable. "You did not tell them to be respectful," she said. "I told them to decide," he said. "That is the better argument." She looked at him sideways. He was eating his bread with the focused attention of a man who is slightly hungry and slightly pleased with himself, and she felt the slow, warm thing move through her again, this time not just in her arm, but settling somewhere more central. On the ride home, she watched the country differently than she had on the way in. The same trees, the same trail, the same brittle cold afternoon light coming level through the pines, but the quality of the familiar had shifted, the way it sometimes does, when something that has been present and unconsidered suddenly becomes visible, becomes real. She thought about his hand, steady and warm around hers at the wagon step. She thought about his voice in the market square, saying her name. She said nothing about any of this, because she was still being careful, but when they got back to the farm and he went to the barn to unhitch the horse and she went inside to start the fire, she did it all with a particular awareness of the space around her. The space she was in, the space he was about to return to, and the way those two spaces had begun, quietly and without ceremony, to feel like one. Winter arrived properly the following week, hard and definitive, the way winters on the frontier do not so much begin as announce themselves in the night and refuse to be argued with. 2 feet of snow fell in 2 days, and the world outside the cabin became white and still and absolute. They were snowed in together, and neither of them said much about it. What happened during those weeks of deep winter was that they learned each other in the way that proximity and shared work teaches you a person slowly, with detail. Vola learned that Clayton sang to himself when he was doing repetitive work, always the same 3 or 4 lines of what sounded like a very old trail song, which he always stopped the moment he became aware he was doing it. She learned that he read when the light allowed. He had a small shelf of books, worn-spined and much handled, and he read with the same focused steadiness he brought to physical work. She learned that he was slow to anger, but that the anger, when it came, was precise and cold, rather than explosive, the kind that meant something serious had crossed a line he had spent considerable time thinking about. Clayton learned that Vola talked more in the dark than she did in the daylight, not a great deal more, but enough. He learned that she had strong opinions about the preparation of dried venison, which she communicated through action rather than instruction. She simply took the venison from him one evening and began doing it differently, and the result was so substantially better that he had no argument. He learned that she had a habit, when thinking hard, of running her thumb slowly along the carved stone at her throat, the Broken Summit Mountain from her mother, and that this was a private thing she was not particularly aware of doing, and he was careful not to mention it. He learned that she had fought her first real battle at 18, been left for dead once, carried a wounded clan sister 3 miles through mountain snow at 22, and led a rearguard action at 24 that saved 40 people, and was remembered in clan storytelling as a decisive moment that she herself refused to call heroic. It was the obvious thing to do, she said, when he asked about it. They were sitting close to the fire because the temperature outside had dropped to the kind of cold that makes walls feel thin, and the lamp was burning warm and steady on the windowsill. Most people do not do the obvious thing when the obvious thing is very dangerous, he said. She looked at him. Some things matter more than being safe. Yes, he said quietly. They do. Something in the way he said it made her still for a moment. She was looking at him and he was looking at the fire, and she studied the angle of his profile, the straight line of his nose, the set of his jaw, the way the firelight moved across the dark stubble there. She felt very aware of the small distance between them on the bench before the hearth, a foot of winter air and two people being very careful. "Clayton," she said. He turned to look at her. She was closer than he had registered, or perhaps she had moved, or he had, because the distance between them had contracted without either of them accounting for it. And she was looking at him with those amber gold eyes that had never once in all these weeks been anything but direct. And what she was looking at him with now was something she had not looked at him with before. It was not a question exactly. It was closer to an acknowledgement. "I know what this is, and I believe you know it too, and I would like to know what you are going to do about it." He reached out and touched her face. It was the most careful, deliberate gesture she had ever received from another person, his fingers along the side of her jaw, the rough warmth of his hand against her skin, his thumb barely brushing the arc of her cheekbone. He did it slowly, giving her every moment to move away, and she did not move away. She brought her hand up and held her large, scarred hand over his, holding it in place, and they sat like that in the firelight for a moment that seemed to belong to a different order of time than the rest of the winter. Then he leaned toward her, and she let him, and when they kissed it was the kind of kiss that is very gentle and very serious at the same time, tentative at first, then slower and deeper and warm, the way a fire builds when you give it air. His free hand found her shoulder, the curve of it under the wool, and she felt her fingers close against the back of his neck where his hair curled at the collar, and the fire burned low and steady on the hearth, and neither of them was cold. When they pulled back they sat with their foreheads nearly touching, both breathing a little unevenly, and there was a silence that was not awkward but full. "I was wondering when that was going to happen," Vola said. He laughed low and quiet, the sound of it close to her ear. "I was trying to be respectful of your timeline," he said. "My timeline," she said, "had been ready for about 2 weeks. "That is genuinely useful information," he said, and kissed her again. The months that followed were the strangest and best of Vola Earthshaker's life, and she thought about that sometimes. The peculiarity of it, that the best months of a life that had included great battles and hard survivals and the fierce love of a clan family should turn out to be a winter on a small farm in the human frontier territories with a man who sang to himself while fixing harnesses. But strangeness was not the same as being wrong, and she had learned early that the best things in life very rarely came in the shapes you had expected. She did not leave when the snow cleared. This time the reason did not require examining or explaining. She stayed because she chose to, because she had begun to understand that choosing to stay somewhere was itself a kind of power she had never exercised, and she found that she liked it. She liked having a place where the lamp was always on. Spring came to the farm with a rush of muddy urgency, planting season, arriving with the curt energy of something that has been waiting behind a door and is now not interested in being slow about it. There was land to turn and seed to put in, and fences that had not survived the winter to replace, and there were not enough hours in any one day. Vola found herself pulling as much weight as Clayton, planning the layout of the root crops, deciding which fields should rest this season, managing the turning of the soil with the efficiency of a woman who had organized campaigns and understood the logistics of sustained effort. Clayton watched her work sometimes with a particular expression, warm and a little awed, the face of a man who has been given more than he expected, and has not quite gotten used to a tan when she caught him at it. She gave him her not quite smile and went back to work. And he went back to work. And the farm turned from a place of winter stillness to a place of spring noise and green-smelling mud. They slept in the same bed. It had happened gradually, not suddenly. First the proximity of the long winter evenings drawing them closer, then the ease of it becoming the expectation of it, and then one night in late winter it had simply been understood without being discussed. The first morning Vola woke in that wide bed with Clayton's arm across her back and his steady breathing at her shoulder. She lay still for a very long time, cataloging the experience with the careful attention she had always brought to things she wanted to remember. She had slept beside clan sisters in frozen camps. She had shared ground with warriors after battle when warmth was survival. This was different. This was chosen and tender and particular. And it was his arm specifically, and his breathing specifically, and the particular warmth of his body against the cool air of the cabin morning. And she wanted to remember all of it. The love that had been building between them through the long winter and the early spring was by spring's full arrival something substantial and real. The kind of love that does not announce itself loudly, but is present in everything, in the way he brought her tea without being asked, in the way she kept track of the small herd's health and managed the sick ewe through a difficult lamb, in the way they argued about the fence placement in the south field with genuine heat, and then compromised, and were both pleased with the result. It was a love that had been built out of real material work and honesty and proximity, and the particular courage of two people who had both been alone long enough to understand exactly what they were choosing. In the early evenings, when the day's work was done, and the fire was going, and the lamp was lit on the porch, they sat together on the wide bench before the hearth and talked with the ease of people who have stopped managing what they say to each other. She told him more of the Greywood, more of her mother, more of the wars, not with pain but with the steady clarity of memory that has been integrated, carried, accepted. He told her about growing up on a smaller farm to the east, about his father who had been taciturn and hard, and also had given him the acre of kitchen garden that was the most affectionate thing the man had ever done. He told her about the woman he had married at 23, who had been quick-witted and brave, and who had died 2 springs ago of a fever that would have been treatable if they had been close enough to a healer, which they were not. And that was a grief he still carried with the same steadiness with which he carried everything difficult. Vola held his hand when he talked about it, and he held hers, and they sat in the lamplight with the full weight of both their lives present between them, and it did not break anything. One evening in late spring, when the kitchen garden was planted and the fields were coming green, and the days were warming fast, Clayton came inside from the barn and found her at the table with the folded paper that had been lying face down since she arrived. She had not snooped. She had found it on the floor where it had evidently fallen and was setting it back on the table. "What is that?" she asked. He took it from her and unfolded it and looked at it for a moment before he handed it back. It was a notice from the county land office, a formal document noting that taxes on the property had been assessed at a rate that had increased from the previous year, with a secondary notation that if the increase was not met by midsummer, the property would be subject to review. "The county raised the rate last fall," he said. "I was managing it, but it will be tight this season." She read the document carefully. She was literate. The Earthshaker clan had kept records, and her mother had made sure she could read both the common tongue and the old orc script. The numbers were not gentle. "How short will you be?" she asked. "Probably a quarter of it," he said. "If the harvest is good and I can get a fair price at market, I might close the gap. If the harvest is only decent, I will not." She looked at the paper. Then she looked at him. "I have been here since autumn," she said. "I have not been contributing to this. You have been working the farm alongside me. Working and contributing to expenses is not the same thing," she said. She had always been direct about money. Wars were expensive and resource management was something she had learned at the practical edge of necessity. I have a small amount of coin saved. Clan allocation from the last 3 campaigns. I never spent it because I was always in the field. It is not a great deal, but it is something. Vola, I am not offering it as charity, she said, with the precise firmness that closed arguments before they became circular. I am offering it as a household contribution. If we are going to, she paused for a fraction of a second that he would not have noticed if he had not been watching her very carefully, which he was. If we are going to be building something here together, then the practical things of it matter to me. The silence that followed was the kind that contains a great deal of what has not yet been said. Are we, he asked quietly, building something here together? She looked at him steadily. In the lamplight, her amber eyes were very clear, and she held the paper between them on the table like a physical ledger of everything they had not yet made explicit. I want to, she said. It was one of the most honest things she had ever said out loud, and it cost her something small and worth paying. I want to stay here, on this farm, with you. That is what I want. I am telling you because you should know, and because I think you want it too, and because neither of us is the type to wait around indefinitely for the other one to be brave first. Clayton sat down across from her at the table. He was smiling, not a small careful smile but a real one, warm and full and unguarded in the way his face was unguarded on those occasions when he forgot to manage it. I want that too, he said. I have wanted it since about the 2nd week, possibly the 1st. Possibly the 1st, she said, and did not bother hiding the warmth in her voice. He reached across the table and took her hand. She turned her hand over and held his, and the tax notice sat between them on the table and was temporarily irrelevant. Harrow Ford did not change its mind about her all at once, because nothing worth having changes all at once. It changed the way most things change in small frontier communities through repeated exposure and the gradual erosion of abstraction. An orc woman in war reports is a frightening thing. An orc woman who buys flour from your mill and pays in honest coin and does not do anything alarming is a different proposition. An orc woman who carries your elderly neighbor's wood supply up from the cart when his back gives out on the main street is a different proposition still. The first time Vola walked into Harrow Ford alone, Clayton was ill with a mild fever that she refused to let him ignore, and the supplies were needed. The market square did the thing it always did, going quiet and watchful. She went to the mill, bought flour, bought salt, bought lamp oil, and on her way back to the wagon she passed the elderly man whose back had given out over his woodpile, and without breaking stride she picked up the wood and carried it to his door. He thanked her with the startled courtesy of someone whose automatic response has kicked in before their prejudice has had a chance to. You are Turner's woman, he said, from the farm up on the ridge. I am, she said. He is a good man, the old man said. He is, she agreed. By summer she was simply part of the landscape of Harrow Ford's market days present, contained, reliable. The broad-bearded man who had challenged her on the first day never apologized and never became friendly, but he had stopped being a problem, which was the practical equivalent of a resolution. The sheriff, a lean, watchful woman named Aldra who wore her deputy's star like a habit she had stopped, noticing had spoken to Vola exactly once, early in the summer, pulling her aside at the market edge to say that she wanted to understand what Vola's situation was, and whether there was anything she needed to know. Vola had told her briefly and completely. She was formerly of the Earthshaker clan. She had left under hostile circumstances. She had no present affiliation with any clan faction. She was living on the Turner property. She did not intend trouble, and if trouble came from another direction she intended to handle it as minimally as possible. Aldra had listened, nodded, and said, Fair enough. If you get any clan traffic coming through looking for you, let me know before anything happens. I will, Vola said, and had thought, for the first time in months, about Groda, about the people who might still be loyal to him, about the fact that she had left without resolution, and that unresolved things had a habit of following her. She had not said anything about this to Clayton, and she was not entirely sure why. partly because she did not want to trouble the peace of what they had built, partly because she was still, despite everything, despite all the weeks of being steady and open with him, not entirely accustomed to allowing someone to carry part of her worries. It was a habit of aloneness that she was only slowly breaking. The trouble came in midsummer, which was probably the only time it could have been dramatic enough to be truly trouble. Everything visible, the fields green and gold, the sky large and open and blue above the ridge. She was in the south field when she saw them come over the far rise, 3 riders, moving at the purposeful pace of people who have been looking for a specific place and have found it. Orc riders. She recognized the colors before she could see faces. The dark red and black of Groda's war faction, the particular cut of the riding leathers that his outriders wore. She straightened up from the row she was working and stood for a moment, looking at the 3 riders descending the slope toward the farm, and she felt the old thing come back into her body, the pre-battle clarity, the way the world sharpened at the edges and became very simple. She had known this would come eventually. She had hoped it would not, but hope was not a strategy. She walked out of the field to meet them in the open space before the barn, which was where she wanted to be, rather than letting them come to her at the house. She was in her work clothes, the leather bodice and travel trousers and boots, unchanged from the morning, and she was carrying nothing except the short-handled hoe she had been using, which she set against the fence post as she walked, slowly and deliberately, so they could see her hands. They pulled up about 20 feet from her. The lead rider was a man she recognized, Dirk, one of Groda's senior outriders, a heavy-set orc with a scar bisecting his left brow. He looked at her with the expression of a man who has been sent to do something he has a specific script for. "Earthshaker," he said. "Dirk," she said. "Long ride." "The war chief extends an invitation," he said, which was the polite way of saying that Groda wanted her back and had sent men to make the wanting felt. "I declined the last several invitations," she said. "The answer has not changed." "Things have changed in the camp," Dirk said. "The old families are asking for you. There is talk of—" "I am not interested in camp politics," she said, cutting through it. "I am finished with Groda, I am finished with the war faction, and I am finished with any invitation that comes with 3 riders as the punctuation. Tell him that." Dirk looked at her steadily. Behind him, the other 2 riders were watching the house. "You have made a life here," Dirk said. Not accusing, noting. "I have," she said, "with a human." "With Clayton Turner," she said. "Yes." Something moved across Dirk's face, something complicated, not entirely hostile. She had known him for years, had campaigned beside him once in the Second Border War. He was not a cruel man, he was a loyalist, which was a different thing. "The war chief will not be pleased," he said. "The war chief's pleasure is not my concern," she said. "And you know, Dirk, you have known since we were fighting in the eastern passes together, that you cannot bring me back to something I have decided to leave. You have ridden a long way for an answer you already knew." The silence stretched across the open field. The summer wind moved through the long grass. "The old families are calling for elections," Dirk said, very quietly, dropping the official tone. "In the autumn. If you were there, your name would be—" "I know what my name would be," she said. "And I am telling you that my name is going to stay here on this farm with this man, and that is the only political statement I intend to make from here on." She looked at him steadily. "Tell them I said that. Tell the old families that if they manage the elections and Groda falls from power, I wish them well, and I will keep hearing news of the clan from whatever distance I am living at." Dirk held her gaze for a long, measuring moment. Then he nodded once, short, respectful, the nod of a soldier acknowledging a decision he does not agree with but understands. "Stay well, Earthshaker," he said. "Safe road, Dirk," she said. The 3 riders turned and went back up the slope the way they had come, and she stood watching until they crested the rise and disappeared over the far side, and then she stood for 1 more minute just breathing. She heard the cabin door open behind her. She turned. Clayton was on the porch, a hand on the post where the lamp hung unlit now, in the full afternoon light, watching the far ridge where the riders had gone. His face was composed, but his hand was tight on the post. "They are gone," she said, walking back toward the house. "I see that." His eyes came to her. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she said. She came up onto the porch and stood before him, and he looked at her carefully, at her face, at her hands, at everything, the way he always looked when he wanted to know the truth of how something had landed. "They wanted you to go back," he said. "They did." "And you?" "I said no," she said simply. "I am exactly where I want to be." His hand left the post and came to her face, the same way it had the first time, careful and deliberate, and she leaned into it. "I am going to ask you something," he said. "And I want you to know that I am asking it because I want to, not because of those riders or any external thing." She waited. He looked at her, the full, unhurried look of a man who has been thinking something for a long time and has decided to say it. "Vola Earthshaker," he said, "will you stay? Not until the season changes, not until something pulls you away. Stay, the way people stay when they have decided this is where they belong. Will you build this life with me? Whatever that looks like, however long it takes the town to adjust, however complicated it gets with the clan and the county and all of it, will you stay and build it with me?" She was quiet for a moment. Not because she did not know the answer, but because the answer deserved its proper moment. Because she had been alone through too many things, had carried too much alone, had worn the weight of a life built only on her own shoulders for too long, and this man was asking her to put some of it down, to let him help hold it, and she wanted to receive that fully and not rush past it. "Yes," she said, "I will stay." He pulled her close, not tentatively, but fully, his arms around her, his face in her hair, and she held him back with the whole-body certainty of someone who has finally found the place where her strength is not a threat but simply a fact of her, and is welcome here. They did not have a formal ceremony, because there was no framework in Harrow Ford for a ceremony between an orc woman and a human man, and neither of them needed one to know what they had decided. What they did instead was this. On a morning in early autumn, when the leaves on the ridge above the farm were going gold and red and the air had the clean, cold smell of the season turning, they stood together on the porch of the cabin before dawn and made their promises to each other in the language they had been building all this time, not ornate, not performed, just true. He promised her that the lamp would always be on. She promised him that she would always come home. Then they went inside and made breakfast, because the wood needed splitting and the last of the root crop needed pulling before the first hard frost, and the life they had promised each other was not a life that waited for its work to be done before it began. Autumn came on rich and full. The harvest was the best Clayton had seen in 3 years. He said so one evening with the kind of quiet amazement of a man who has been holding his breath and has finally remembered to breathe in the yield from the south field, which had been following Vola's rotation plan since spring, was substantially better than the north field's old method. She did not say "I told you so," but she looked at him when he said it with an expression that communicated it entirely. The tax was paid. The farm was secure. The winter's provisions were stacked deep and sufficient in the root cellar and the barn loft. Clayton sold a portion of the surplus at the autumn market in Harrow Ford, and Vola was with him, as she always was now, and the market square received them with a normalcy that still surprised her, even now, a mixture of acknowledgement and the settled comfort of the familiar that she had not expected to achieve in a single year in a human town. The old man whose wood she had carried at the beginning of the summer brought them both a jar of preserved summer berries from his wife's kitchen, which was one of the small gestures she would carry with her as a marker for how things had changed. Sheriff Aldra stopped by their wagon to tell them that a rider had come through from the eastern border with news from the orc territories. Groda's war faction had fallen in the autumn clan elections. The old families were now in council, and the new elected speaker was a woman named Dura, someone Vola knew, an old ally of her mother's. Vola received this news with a stillness that Clayton recognized as her processing something large. "It is good news," Aldra said, and left them to it. Clayton put his hand on Vola's arm. She would have been good for the clan, Vola said after a moment. Dura, she lost a son in the last border war and she has been saying for 10 years that the fighting was not worth what it cost. She was quiet for another moment. It does not change anything here. I'm not going back even now, but it means she paused. It means the people my mother knew are not entirely lost. That matters. Of course it does, he said. She covered his hand with hers on her arm. I am all right, she said. I am glad. And she was. The grief was there. It was always there for the clan, for the years of war, for her mother. For all of it, but grief and gladness are not opposites. And she had made peace a long time ago with the fact that you could carry both. The winter of their second year together was different from the first, easier and harder in different ways, the way all second years of anything are. Easier because they knew each other fully now, had moved past the careful early stages into something deeper and more relaxed. The intimacy of two people who have seen each other in every state, sick, exhausted, angry, tender, ridiculous, profound, and have remained. Harder in ways that were also good. There was more at stake now, more to protect, more that mattered. On a cold night in the depth of January, with the snow deep and the cabin warm and the fire burning low, they lay together in the wide bed in the ease and warmth of two people who have learned each other's bodies the way they have learned each other's minds, with care and attention and the deep pleasure of being fully known. And Vola said quietly into the warm dark, I think I would like a child. A long, still silence. Then his voice low, so would I. She turned to look at him in the dark. He was looking back at her. It will be complicated, she said. Half-blood children between orc and human are rare. I do not know that it is even. We will find out, he said. And whatever is complicated about it, we will manage it. He reached out and tucked a loose strand of her dark hair back from her face slowly in the habit they had built. We have managed everything else. She smiled, not the not quite smile, but a real one, soft and full and for him alone. She was pregnant by spring. The healer in Harrow Forden, older woman named Myra, who had delivered enough mixed heritage children in the border territories to know what she was doing, confirmed it in early April with the matter-of-fact competence that Vola found deeply reassuring. She had questions, and Myra answered them without drama. The pregnancy would likely run longer than a full human term, but shorter than a full orc term. The child would be robust. There were things to watch for, and Myra laid them out plainly, and Vola listened carefully and asked follow-up questions. And by the end of the appointment, she felt as settled as it was possible to feel about something that was entirely new. Clayton was outside the healer's house when she came out, sitting on the hitching post with his hands folded, trying to look as though he had not been slightly holding his breath for the last half hour. She said nothing, she just looked at him, and he read her face the way he read her now, with the fluency of 2 years of close attention, and what he read made him stand up and come to her and hold her in the warm spring street of Harrow Ford, and she let him, her arms around him, her face against his neck. All right, he said. All right, she confirmed. The pregnancy was not easy. Nothing entirely new is easy, but it was manageable, and they managed it together, which was the word she kept returning to, together. She was not diminished by it. She remained strong and capable through most of it, adjusting the physical demands of the farm work with the pragmatic efficiency she brought to everything. She stopped swinging the heavy splitting maul somewhere in the 7th month, not because she could not have managed it, but because Clayton asked her to, and she could see in his face that the asking came from love rather than condescension, and she was willing to make that distinction. The birth happened in the autumn, a full moon night with the wind coming off the northern ridge, Myra there and steady, Clayton at her side throughout and refusing to be elsewhere, his hand in hers through the whole of it. What came into the world was a boy heavy and dark-haired, with the slightly green-tinged skin of his heritage, and a set of lungs that announced him with authority. Clayton held him first, because Vola was exhausted in the specific and magnificent way of a person who has done a monumental thing and needs a moment before they do anything else. He held the baby with the focused, slightly staggered care of a man who has never done this before and is determined to do it correctly. And he looked at his son's face, at the familiar and unfamiliar landscape of that tiny face, the mix of both of them in the dark brows and the small fists and the furious squinting eyes. And the expression on his face was one Vola would remember for the rest of her life. "Hello," he said to the baby, in a completely normal voice. As if they had simply been waiting to meet each other. As if this were the ordinary continuation of an ongoing conversation. When they handed the baby to her, she held him and looked at him and felt the whole shape of everything that had happened. The wars, the border crossing, the lamplight in the dark, the farm and the seasons and the long building of this love feel suddenly like it had a coherent shape, like it was a story that had been moving toward this point all along. She named him Iran, which in the old orc language meant simply river stone, something that had been shaped by everything it had passed through. Iran Turner Earthshaker. The name went on the land record in the county office in Harrow Ford, written in the careful hand of the county clerk who had, over the 2 years of Vola and Clayton's presence in the area, progressed from barely concealed discomfort to the professional neutrality of a man who has decided that his feelings about a matter are not relevant to his administrative function. He wrote the name without comment and handed them their copy, and they walked out of the county office into the autumn afternoon with their son in Vola's arms. The years that followed were full and difficult and beautiful in the way that real things are beautiful, textured, uneven, containing sorrow and abundance in no particular order. Iran grew from an infant into a small child who had his father's steadiness and his mother's directness, and who was, at 4, capable of opinions about the most efficient way to stack firewood that he expressed loudly and repeatedly until someone acknowledged them. He was dark-haired and green-skinned and strongly built, and he moved through Harrow Ford with the complete confidence of a child who has never been given a reason to think the world would not receive him, which was something both of his parents had worked hard at and were glad of. Harrow Ford had changed around them, or perhaps they had changed within it. Or perhaps both of these things happened at the same time, the way most true changes do. The sheriff, Aldra, had become something close to a friend, had come to the farm twice in times of need, had spoken up in council when a proposal about orc residents in the territory was being discussed, and had said, clearly and on the record, that she had found the residents of the Turner farm to be exactly the kind of people a frontier community needed. The older woman who had bought turnips on Vola's first day in the market had brought preserves every autumn since, and once, when Iran was an infant, and Vola was managing the farm almost alone through a difficult period of Clayton's illness, had arrived at the gate with 3 women from the town and spent the day helping without being asked and without needing to be thanked. These were not dramatic conversions. They were the slow accumulation of human decency, which operates in small increments and without ceremony, and Vola found that she valued them more than she would have valued a formal proclamation of acceptance. The quiet acts of people deciding that someone was worth knowing, that was real. Clayton recovered from the illness, a chest sickness that had taken hold hard in the winter of Iran's 2nd year, and came out of it thinner and more careful about cold mornings, but present. She had been frightened, more frightened than she had been in any battle, and she did not tell him that until he was better, because he did not need to know it while he was sick. When she told him, he looked at her with the steadiness that had been one of the first things she had loved about him. "I was not going anywhere," he said. "I know," she said. "I was frightened anyway." "So was I," he admitted. "Not for myself. For you and Iran. We would have been all right," she said, with the conviction of a woman who knew how to survive. "But I did not want to only be all right. I wanted you." He pulled her close on the wide bench by the hearth, the same bench they had been sitting on the first winter when he touched her face, and she leaned against him with the particular ease of 2 people who have been leaning against each other for long enough that it has become the natural position. News from the orc territories came occasionally, and from a distance through traders and letters carried by riders who knew the routes between the worlds. Speaker Dura had stabilized the clan council. The border wars had not resumed. There had been some skirmishes. There were always some skirmishes. The frontier did not become peaceful all at once, but nothing like the campaigns of Groda's years. Vola received each piece of news with attention and processed it with the considered care of someone who is no longer in the middle of the thing but has not stopped caring about it. She wrote to Dura once in the second year after the elections, a careful letter in the old orc script, sent through a border trader. She told Dura where she was and who she was with and what she had built, and she said that she was glad the old families had found their footing, and she wished the clan well from whatever distance she was living at. She did not expect a reply and did not hear for 7 months, and then a letter came back in Dura's distinctive hand, 3 dense pages of it, and when she read it she sat at the kitchen table for a long time afterward. Clayton came in from the barn and found her there with the letter, and the expression on her face that he had learned meant something large was being processed. He made tea and set it in front of her and sat across from her without asking. Dura says my mother's garden has been maintained, Vola said eventually. One of the younger clan women took it over. She has kept the healer's mint and the root varieties. She writes that the spacing is very particular. She was quiet for a moment. She also says there is a story told about the rearguard action in the eastern passes, that I led the retreat that saved 40 people. She says they tell it on the last warm night of summer at the Greywood race. He looked at her across the table. That is a legacy, he said quietly. It is strange, she said. I left because there was nothing left for me there, and somehow I am still present in some way, in the stories, in the garden. She looked at him. I have a legacy there and a life here. Both things are true at the same time. Yes, he said. That is usually how it works when you have actually lived. She smiled at him across the table, not the not-quite smile. The real one, the one she gave him. Iran was 6 when Vola told Clayton she was pregnant again. She told him in the morning, before the farm work began, sitting across the table from him the way they always talked when something mattered. He listened, and then he set down his mug and came around the table and kissed her, which was not a complicated response, but was entirely the right one. The second child was a girl born in summer, easier than Iran's birth, equally loud about announcing herself. She came with a full head of dark hair and Vola's amber gold eyes, and a temperament that made itself known within the first week as decisive and opinionated, which surprised absolutely no one. They named her Marta, for Clayton's grandmother, and her full name was Vola Earthshaker Turner, because Vola felt that their daughter should carry both names forward in the order that felt right for her. Iran received his sister with the serious, slightly proprietary interest of a firstborn child, who has been preparing for this, and has opinions about how it should be conducted. He was gentle with her in the particular way of a child, who has been shown what gentleness looks like with care and deliberate attention, and within a month he had appointed himself her protector with a conviction that was very nearly funny and also deeply moving. The farm grew with them. Clayton expanded the south field in the 3rd year, following the rotation plan Vola had designed, and added a small orchard of fruit trees along the eastern fence line. She built with her own hands, over the course of a single determined summer, a small outbuilding that served as a tanning and leatherworking space, because she had found that she missed the craft work she had done in the clan before the wars consumed everything, and because the farm produced enough hide from the small herd to make the work practical. She was good at it in the unhurried, complete way she was good at most things she put her hands to. Clayton watched her work in the new building sometimes through the open door, the specific admiring attention of a man who loves the way a person moves through the world. She would catch him looking and raise an eyebrow. He would smile, unabashedly. The children, if present, found this incomprehensible and deeply embarrassing, which was its own kind of pleasure. The county of which Harrow Ford was a part began, in those years, to see more movement of orc families across the border. The gradual, careful migration of people who had heard that the eastern frontier was not as hostile as it had been, that there were places where you could put down roots without them being immediately pulled up. Several of these families passed through Harrow Ford, and several of them found their way to the Turner farm on the ridge, because word traveled on the frontier, and what traveled about the Turner farm was that you would be fed and not turned away. Vola and Clayton fed them and did not turn them away, and sometimes helped families find land further north where the county was less developed, and the settling was harder but the interference was less. It was not a systematic thing, and it was not a political statement. It was simply what you did when someone needed it, and you had what they needed, which was the principle Vola had arrived with, and which she found she and Clayton agreed on completely. Sheriff Aldra, over those years, evolved from pragmatic ally to genuine friend, someone who sat at their kitchen table for meals twice a season, and talked with the frank, opinionated ease of a woman who had decided she was done managing what she said. She was the first person in Harrow Ford to call Vola by her first name without it feeling like an effort. Iran was 9 and Marta was 3 when a late-season storm came down off the northern ridge, with more speed and violence than anyone had anticipated, a wall of wind and ice that arrived at midnight and spent the next 12 hours making itself felt. The farm took damage. A section of the barn roof came down. The orchard's newest trees were snapped at their roots. A section of fence was simply gone. When the storm cleared and they went out to assess, the snow was waist-deep on Vola and chest-deep on Clayton, and the work ahead of them was formidable. By noon, there were people from Harrow Ford coming up the ridge trail. Not many, 6 or 7, including the old man whose wood she had carried, and 2 of the younger farming families from the eastern edge of town, and the widow from the miller's family who had been shy and careful around Vola for 3 years, and who showed up at the gate with a sledge of tools and a look of settled determination. They worked all day in the deep cold, clearing snow and salvaging what could be salvaged and shoring up the barn roof with timber from Clayton's supply. And when the light went, Vola built a fire in the yard and made the largest pot of barley stew the kitchen had ever produced, and they all ate together in the cold evening, the steam rising from the bowls, the children moving among the adults with the ease of children who are comfortable in a crowd. It was not a ceremony. It was just people helping, which was its own kind of milestone. That night, after the last of the Harrow Ford neighbors had gone back down the trail, after the children were asleep and the storm damage was addressed and the fire was low, Vola and Clayton sat together on the porch in the cold, wrapped in separate blankets, pressed close, their breath coming in slow clouds in the frozen air, and looked out at the ridge and the dark trees and the few cold stars that had appeared between the moving clouds. The lamp was lit on the porch post. It was always lit. "Do you remember what I looked like when I came over that rise?" she said. "Clearly," he said. "I was not going to come down to the house," she said. "I stood at the tree line for a long time deciding." The lamp was on. That was what made the difference. She looked at the lamp. I had stopped walking because someone had left a light on. He looked at her in the lamplight, at the strong angle of her face, at the amber gold eyes she had given their daughter, at the particular steadiness of her that had never changed through anything. He looked at her the way he always looked at her, with the full, unhurried attention of a man who knows exactly what he has. "I am glad you came down," he said. "So am I," she said. "And I am glad the lamp was on." "Yes," she said, leaning into him, his arm coming around her. "Keep it on." "Always," he said. The years moved forward in the way that years do when a life is full and well made, quickly in retrospect, richly in the living of them. Iran grew into a young man of 13 who was quiet and observant, and who had his mother's strategic mind and his father's patience, and who dealt with the complications of being half-orc in a human frontier town with a composed self-possession that both of his parents recognized and admired. There were moments of friction. A boy in the market who said something he should not have, a clerk at the county office who made a calculation about Iran's intelligence that was both wrong and quickly corrected, And Iran met each of these moments with the combination of firmness and restraint that he had grown up watching his parents model. Clayton handled the ones that needed handling from a parental direction, which was to say that he went to the school and spoke to the instructor with the particular quiet intensity that Clayton Turner could produce when something had genuinely angered him, and left the room with the matter resolved. Vola, when Iran came to her afterward looking at her with the amber eyes that saw everything, said, "The world will make itself felt sometimes. You already know how to feel it and keep standing. That is more than most people learn." Iran looked at her for a long moment. "Is that what you did?" he asked. "In the wars, kept standing." "I kept standing," she said. "And when I was done with the wars, I found a different thing worth standing for." He nodded slowly, in the way of a young person receiving something real. Marta was 7 when she began insisting on accompanying Vola to the leatherworking shed, and by 8 she was doing work that was actually useful, her small hands finding their own competence with the tools. She had Vola's directness and Clayton's warmth, and she was easy to love in the immediate way of a child who makes no effort to be difficult. She also had strong opinions about the spacing of the kitchen garden, which she had clearly inherited. The farm became what Clayton had always wanted it to be, and what Vola had discovered she had always needed without knowing it. A place that grew things, that sustained people, that sent provisions into the world and received the world back in return. They were known in the county as the Turner homestead on the northern ridge, and what was known about the Turner homestead was that it was well-run and generous, and that the woman who co-managed it was someone you did not want to cross in a practical dispute, but who was entirely reasonable to deal with. When Vola was 38 and Clayton was 40, they sat on the porch on a summer evening with a bottle of wine from the Trading Post, which was a luxury they allowed themselves twice a year, and looked out at the farm in the long gold light of a good summer evening. The fields full and green, the orchard going into its best season yet, the children's voices coming from somewhere around the back of the barn, where they had apparently constructed something Vola was choosing not to investigate until tomorrow. "Do you know what I think?" Clayton said. "Tell me," she said. "I think this is exactly what it was supposed to be," he said. "All of it, the whole thing." She looked at him, the dark hair gone partly gray at his temples now, the lines at the corners of his steady brown eyes, the same hands she had studied on their first night by the fire. She looked at him with the full weight of everything, 12 years of it, 2 children and a farm and a town, and the slow building of a life that had been made out of choice rather than circumstance. "Yes," she said, "I think so too." He poured them both more wine, and they sat together in the good light of the long summer evening, the lamp not yet lit on the porch post because the sun was still up, the farm warm and present around them, the children somewhere noisy and safe, and Vola Earthshaker, who had fought 3 clan wars and buried her mother and crossed a winter border bleeding and alone, and stood in the lamplight of an unknown house, wondering whether the world still had anything in it worth trusting, sat beside Clayton Turner and felt, in the most complete and unhurried way, that it did. She reached out and took his hand, and he held it, and the evening light moved across the fields, and the long day of the frontier came slowly, beautifully to its close. Inside the cabin, in the corner near the hearth, was the lamp they had carried in from the porch one winter when it needed a new wick. They had never moved it back. There were 2 lamps now, the one inside and the one on the porch post end. Both of them were lit each evening without fail, and both of them burned through the dark until the morning came. The one on the porch was the first thing visible when you came over the northern ridge in the dark. It always would be.